All right, so I'm going to jump into it now. So some of the topics I'm going to talk about today are kind of the highlights of what it's like to teach in Korea. What are some of the main highlights that we have teachers repeatedly talk about that they enjoy and that are major values for them. What sets us apart as an organization, Premier TEFL, and the ground team in finding placements and helping people transition to Korea. Of course, we're going to talk about the program requirements, which for Korea can be, pretty significant. We're going to talk about what are the components of the placement program. So what can you expect to receive coming through the Premier TEFL program in terms of your Korea placement and all the other associated elements of it. And then we'll end with some of the frequently asked questions that we get when we're doing this kinds of presentations and questions from participants and from prospects. Oops, sorry. Okay, so Korea is a very futuristic type of country. It's one of the most advanced countries in the world. It's got the fastest internet in the world. They've done studies that show that the internet there is really fast compared to almost any other country. It's a country where it's just the technology, the push of the people. They work together to advance the country. You just get that feeling like everyone is working to take Korea to new heights. It really is a fascinating country. It's come so far in the last 50 or 60 years. I don't think there's ever been a time in history where a country has advanced so far in such a small amount of time. So you get this feeling that like you're coming to a country that is just as technologically advanced as the one you lived in and grew up in, and so it doesn't have that. It definitely does not feel like a developing country. It's not a developing country, and it feels very futuristic. But even beside that, it is a country with a very rich and ancient history and lots of traditions. And even in a city like Seoul, you see that kind of juxtaposition of modern technology next to kind of ancient cultural richness. And you see those two things like coexisting quite nicely side by side. So they have a very old history, several thousand years, and they're very proud of their history, and they like to perform aspects of their history and culture on a regular basis. So you feel like, yeah, you're in an advanced country, but there's still like culture and history all around you to soak up. So it's a really cool environment. Obviously, I mean, if you're thinking about coming to Korea, then you've probably tried Korean food. And that is probably one of the best aspects. That's one of my favorite parts of living in Korea and visiting Korea over the years is the food. Fashion, obviously. Korea in Asia is seen as one of the fashion centers and even throughout the world. Karaoke is big there, and of course K-pop. And we find that a lot of our participants who are coming to Korea have some connection to or interest in K-pop and in the music scene in Korea, or some aspect of the popular culture is something that appealed to them, which initially drove their interest to come there. So these are some of the main highlights, I would say, of teaching in Korea and the thing that really motivates people to come to Korea. Some of the off the beaten track aspects of Korea, there's K-pop museums, and that's, like, as I mentioned, a big part of the culture there, and it's a big part of the interest that a lot of expats have coming over. There's also lots of museums in general, history museums, amusement parks. Skiing is a big thing in Korea, so it's quite inexpensive to ski in the country. If you're into like the natural environment, like wilderness, actually beautiful, very mountainous country. So lots of beautiful mountains, lots of great hiking, and just natural scenery. So whether you're into like city life and city things to do, or you're into kind of the natural environment and nature, I think Korea has a bit of everything to suit whatever taste you have. Good question, Randall, and I will definitely get to that throughout this presentation. And if you have any questions at the end, feel free to ask. So in terms of what sets our program apart, which Randall is a very prescient question, one of the major aspects is that we work really hard to place teachers in the kinds of positions that they're going to be successful in. So we really coordinate and work closely with the teacher who's coming over. We don't just say like, okay, here's your placement, take it or leave it. We try to understand the participant, what their interests are, what their capabilities are, and we try to match them with the job that will be the best suited for them. We also have a in-depth cultural orientation, both online before you come over. It's a 1-week online platform cultural orientation that covers history, culture, language, and living and working in Korea. Those are the 4 modules. There's quizzes, there's interactive forums. And then once the teacher arrives, we also have, at times it's a 1-week orientation, but usually it's done over a number of weekends where everyone gets together and does activities. So we go many different places and do activities, and I'll get into what those activities are later on. So we have the orientation both online and in person, and that is something that definitely sets us apart from other organizations. So it's online, and then in person, it's done over several weekends. And then we keep in touch with the participants and make sure that the teachers have a smooth experience throughout their time in Korea. So we check in with them regularly. We host meetups with them to see them in person over several times during their contract. And we also make sure that they have a good experience, and that any kinds of issues with their school or just general kind of issues of life in Korea, that we're there to support them. One other thing I want to mention also is that we have a network there. You know, we have hundreds and hundreds of teachers that we place about 200 teachers a year in Korea. And so we have a network, a peer network, as well as an alumni network that helps keep all of our teachers connected to each other. We find that when teachers go over individually, they tend to be kind of anonymous, like they don't have a group to go over with. They kind of come over in 1s and 2s, and they don't really make connections with other expats, and that can lead to loneliness and the feeling of isolation. So we really take great pains to make sure that everyone's part of a group and they go over and are connected to a group of peers, so that that peer group can both give them support and also help introduce them and take them places where there's, you know, and help them get acclimated to their new environment without just kind of being thrown in the deep end. So I think that peer network and alumni network is something that is really important for Korea. And I feel like a lot of individual schools and other programs don't really focus as much on that. So let's talk about requirements. A bachelor's degree is a requirement. So in order to teach in South Korea, you need to have a bachelor's degree. There's nothing else works. It has to be a bachelor's degree. Even if you have a letter from your university and it's like, I'm going to get my degree, here's a letter that says I graduated. Unfortunately, that's not enough. You need to have a bachelor's degree. We like teachers to be open to being placed all throughout Korea. So coming in with an open mind is really important. Obviously, people can have preferences, and we want to know what those preferences are, and we will ask you about those preferences, but we just can't guarantee we can place you exactly where you want to be, because we aren't the ones who actually hire you, and we send your profile out to the schools, and we have to get schools interested, and they may not be exactly where you want to be. But we know, having done this over 10 years, that no matter where you go in Korea, you're going to have an awesome experience. You're going to have a great cultural experience. You're going to have a great life experience there. We're confident in that. And so we just like teachers to have a bit of an open mind coming over. Good physical and mental health is important. There is a physical conducted once you arrive in Korea, and that physical includes a medical check. And they check for things like communicable diseases. If you're taking medication for mental health reasons or physical health reasons, some of the medical check actually checks any kinds of prescription drugs that you might be on for specific ailments, or whether they're health related or mental health related. So they do a pretty thorough medical check. So we would be needing to screen people to make sure that they'd be successful in passing that check. A clean criminal background check is a must. Even things as small as misdemeanors can have an impact on eligibility for the program. And these are things that are kind of factors of the government, not of the school. So the government says you need to pass the medical check. The government says you need to have a clean criminal background check. So if you do not have a clean criminal background check, then this might not be the right program for you. In terms of age requirements, 35 is kind of the upper limit age requirement for the program. However, on a case-to-case basis, we can potentially bring over people older than 35, but that is dictated by the government as well as by the schools. So we're looking for that like 25 to 35 year age range, but on a case-by-case basis, we can accept people that are older than 35. In terms of the eligibility by nationality, it is pretty strict in that regard. So you must be a citizen or a passport holder, which is citizen, of one of 7 countries: the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Ireland, South Africa, the UK, and Australia, New Zealand. So yeah, so I think it's 7, but I think I might have repeated one. So Australia, New Zealand, UK, US, Canada, Ireland, and South Africa. So if you're not a citizen, passport holder of one of those countries, unfortunately, you would not be eligible for the South Korea program. You also have to have a very clear native accent. So this can be a sticky point for South Korean schools. So we want to make sure that you have a good, clear, native English speaking accent to ensure that you get through the interview process. No visible tattoos in South Korea. They're quite strict about that. So if you have tattoos on your hands or on your neck, that can be a challenge. Obviously, the neck, I would say, is a no-go. But on the hands, maybe there's a way around that with like flesh-colored gloves. But it is a red flag for us because they're quite strict about that. East Asia, they're very strict about tattoos for work purposes. Okay, let's talk about the placement program now. So one of the first steps you'll do through Premier TEFL is you'll take their 120-hour online TEFL course. Once you have completed that, or when you're in the process of completing it, we will have an initial call with you And in that call, we're going to go through everything related to the program. We're going to tell you about the schools. We're going to tell you about the options. We're going to tell you about the visa and document process, because it can be, it's a lengthy process to do, but we're going to walk through everything with you. We're going to keep you on track. We're going to help you verify that you got the correct documents. We're going to tell you how to mail them. We're going to kind of hold your hand through the entire process, because it can be a bit complex to do. So that's what we're here for, and we have a lot of experience with that. So we're going to guide you through that process, keep you on track. Once you have a lot of your documents already completed, we're going to start working with our school network to find you a good placement. Then we're going to set up interviews with you in the school. We're going to help facilitate those interviews. In fact, in some cases, we may even do a mock interview with you beforehand to make sure that you are as successful as you can be in the actual interview, which will come later on. Then we're going to, once the school has accepted you and you've accepted the placement, we're going to help you through the actual visa application process. Then we're going to enter you into your online portion of your orientation course, the 1-week one. You're going to take that with your peers. It's not a self-paced thing. It's an actual course where you're interacting with others who are also going over to Korea around the same time as you. So not only do you get to take the course, but you get to interact and meet others who are also coming over to Korea. Then once you arrive, we pick you up from the airport. We take you to your accommodation, which is going to be the accommodation you're going to be in for your entire time in Korea. And we help you get settled in. And then we work with the school and also check in on you on a regular basis to make sure that you're acclimating and that any kinds of questions or concerns are quickly addressed. Then, of course, once you're in the country, we will host our in-person orientation component, which, as I mentioned before, goes over several weekends. So just to delve into the online culture course a little bit more, as I mentioned, we're talking about Korean history, Korean culture in general, and culture in organizations, which is you're going to be working in a Korean school. So you're going to be working in a Korean organizational, cultural kind of environment. We talk about living and working in Korea. So everything you need to know about interacting with people in general, people in the workplace, and then Korean language. So these are the 4 modules that you will be, and each module has a forum where you're going to post assignments and get feedback from your peers and feedback from the instructor and insights from the instructor. And you'll take quizzes at the end of each forum, and then you'll get a certificate and a grade at the end. So this is to make sure that when you get to Korea, you hit the ground running and you know enough to acclimate into the culture and be successful. So in terms of where this graphic here kind of gives an idea of where our placements are. We're going to talk a little bit more about salary in a second, but where our placements are, what our placements look like in terms of the breakdown. And I'm going to do a deeper dive into each part of this, but you can see that the Seoul and when we say Seoul, we don't mean like central Seoul. We mean the entire, all the province around Seoul and kind of in that Seoul region of Korea. So that's where the majority of our placements are, is in the Seoul and the greater region. Incheon is kind of a satellite city, a major city that looks kind of like it's part of Seoul. It's kind of connected to Seoul. That's probably our second biggest placement area. And then more southward, like Busan, Daegu, Daejeon, those are areas where we also place a decent number of teachers as well. So this is kind of gives you a look. You can see the salary, accommodation. I'm going to talk about each one of these components in deeper detail in the subsequent slides. But School breakdown, private schools are about 80% of our placements, and public schools are around 20%. Over time, the number of public school positions has diminished and the number of private school positions has increased, not just within our organization, but within Korea in general. We've seen private school positions increase significantly and public school positions tend to reduce every year. So let's do a deeper dive into some of these components here. I've already talked about like what to expect. So this is kind of what happens on the initial interviews and all the way through that process. So I'm gonna jump over that part. So contracts, they're always one-year contracts. So when you're coming to Korea, you need to be able to commit to 1 year. That's kind of non-negotiable. Salaries are about $1,700 to $1,900 US per month. Teachers can easily save about 30% of their salary or more because of all the benefits that you get as a teacher in Korea. And the tax is roughly 5%, so it's a lot less than in pretty much every Western country. One of the benefits of Korea that kind of stands apart from a lot of countries is that they have your initial flight to Korea is reimbursed. So you pay first and you get like a certain allotment of to spend. And you pay first and you bring your receipt and they reimburse you usually within the first paycheck. So they'll reimburse you for the fare to an extent. Like if you buy like a $5,000 business class ticket, you're not going to get that reimbursed, but you to an extent they will reimburse a full one-way coach ticket fare from whatever your country is that you're coming from. Free accommodation throughout. When you arrive, you are placed in an accommodation near the school that you're going to be teaching in, and that is where you will be living for the duration of your contract. And we're going to get into accommodations more a little bit later, but that accommodation is free. You don't have to pay anything except for electricity and water, which will be like maybe $50 to $70 a month in general, unless you really use a lot of electricity. So your accommodation is free and it's part of your package. You get about 8 to 10 vacation days a year as part of your contract. And then you also get all public holidays. And you'll be working Monday to Friday each week. So you'll have your weekends off. Korean people tend to take the weekends off. So it's very rare for students to learn on the weekends, which is quite different from other countries in Asia. Also, one of the really great benefits that a lot of organizations really don't focus on is once you're finished your 12-month contract, you get a 1-month bonus salary as part of your contract. So you work for 12 months, you get 13-month salary. So at the end of your contract, you'll get a full month salary, severance pay or bonus at the end of your contract. And that's just, you don't have to like reach any targets or anything like that. It's just like, that's what you get for completing your contract. You get that 13-month salary. Hi, Addie. I don't think so. I think if you work abroad, this is a question about taxation. Your earnings abroad should be, it should be tax exempt up to $100,000, roughly around $100,000. So I'm not sure if the U.S. has some kind of special thing, but you should not be taxed on your foreign earnings up to $100,000 as an American citizen. Anything over 100,000 then gets you into taxable foreign income. As far as I know, I'm not a certified accountant, but that's my understanding. So let's talk about the different two different types of schools you may find yourself at. The first are private language schools. They're also called Hagwons. And these are schools where students go to after they get finished with their regular school. So the regular school finishes at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and then they go to private language schools to study until like 6 or 7 o'clock, until it's time for dinner. These private language schools are ubiquitous around Korea. And the teaching hours are usually around 10 or 11 till about 7 o'clock. So your day starts at around 10 or 11 a.m. And then it goes until about 7 p.m. So that's usually the hours, although they do vary a little bit. If you're dealing with really young kids, maybe you'll start from 9 or 10 a.m. and you'll finish at 5 or 6 p.m. If you're dealing with older kids, then that gets skewed a little bit later. So private language schools are, Hagwons, they get a bad rap sometimes online because there are so many around the country, and also because like people who have good experiences don't tend to talk about them much online, but people who have bad experience tend to really express that online. But as somebody who's worked with Hagwons for years and years and years, and actually is the part owner of a Hagwon as well, they are really good places, and the vast majority of them are run by good managers who take care of their teachers. And so I think that they do get an unfair bad rap, but they actually are just like any language school in any other country. But as a society, Korea does kind of put intense pressure on their children to study. And so sometimes that studying takes, is a little bit extreme, and it runs students down a bit. So about 5 or 7 years ago, Korea passed a law that required that Hagwons and private language schools, private tutor centers of all stripes, from science to mathematics to English, that they should close at a certain time, that they should not be open past a certain time. And that really helped a lot to shorten the school day for Korean students, which was they were studying longer hours than almost any students in the world. Yes, Duncan, you would have to have your bachelor's degree done with your diploma in hand to start the process for teaching in Korea. So private language centers are a big source of teaching jobs in Korea, and that's where most of our placements are. And also, when you're teaching in the private language centers, most of the kids that you're teaching are kindergarten and elementary school. That's what most of the private language centers focus on, is that age bracket. So in the language centers, you're looking at about 8 to 15 students in a class, so it's really not a big classroom. The classrooms have a lot of technology resources, lots of materials and supporting material. You're teaching around 30 hours a week. So you have like anywhere from 25 to 30 teaching hours a week. You're generally teaching in a language school that has more than one native English speaker. So there's usually 2 or 3 or more native English speakers with you at the school. The other type of school in Korea is the public school system. And there's 2 main intakes. So for Hagwons, for private language schools, we recruit teachers all year round. Although I will say that December, January is the quietest time of year. But generally, we can place teachers all year round. For public schools, there's only 2 main intakes. Well, the main one is in March, and then there's a much smaller one in September. And in the public schools, you're teaching, and just like what public schools are like back in your home country. So you're teaching from like 7:30 a.m. to 3:30, 4 p.m. And getting into school a little bit early. Classroom sizes tend to be larger, and they tend to have the same amount of resources that you would find in a Hagwon. but you're teaching not just kindergarten and elementary, but you could be teaching a wider range of students and also at the high school level as well. Also, one of the differences between the private language schools or Hagwons and the public is that in the public schools, you typically have a South Korean co-teacher in the classroom with you at all times. So also at the public school level, it's pretty much routine that you would have a little bit more lesson planning responsibilities, whereas in the private Hagwons, private language schools, there's minimal lesson planning. There is some, but not as much because they're using different types of programs and they're using lesson plans that have already been developed. But at the public schools, you may teach less hours, but you've got a lot more prep time. Also at the public schools, they tend to be in smaller town areas sometimes, and you tend to be the only native English speaker at the school. So let's talk a little bit more about the FAQs that we get. A lot of questions obviously is about like, okay, what are their apartments like? What can I expect in that? So the vast majority of our teachers have a one-room studio type of apartment. So you're living in your own apartment. It's in a modern building. Here's some pictures of apartments and what they look like. They're quite small, but they've got everything you need. You've got like the kitchen area. You've got a desk. You've got a small bed. You got a bathroom. A lot of apartments have heated floors because of the winter in Korea, which resembles kind of like the winter in New England in the United States. So it can be pretty cold. So you have heated floors in the winter. Usually there's like a space between the front door and the actual apartment for you to keep your shoes. So yeah, you'll have your own apartment. Will be furnished with the basics, but you may need to get like, you know, additional things that you need. You'll be paying utilities. The bathroom is kind of, we call wet bathroom. So it's like the shower, the sink, and the toilet are usually all in one area, not like segmented out. So that's something to be prepared for. It will allow you to multitask in the morning, has its plus side. And also you'll be a very short distance, either a walk, a short ride on the train or bus to the school. So the apartments the apartments are sourced by the school. You don't really have any choice. You can't be like, oh, I found this place. Can you? No, they rent the apartment out for you, and it's always a solid, good standard, and modern, with kind of usually with a lot of safety involved in terms of like getting into the building, getting into your apartment, and they choose that for you, but it's always a good standard. One of the things that we do is when you come over as a group, we will add you to our Facebook group, our closed Facebook group, which is filled with teachers who are also coming over to Korea or who are in Korea, so that you can connect with them, ask questions. We really encourage teachers who are in country to mentor teachers who are still in the process of coming over to the country, to make sure that everyone has a lot of support and can kind of get as much insight and information as they can from multiple sources within our network, not just us as the program providers, but also their peers who are on the ground teaching in country. These are just some feedback from people, some kudos that people have given over the years that talk about the way we run the organization. We try to run it like a family in terms of like our participants are part of our family. And so we do a lot of activities together, like cooking classes and other things during the orientation. We go on excursions together to the Grand Palace and to some of the different markets and stuff like that to try to bond together. And so that's something that we really take seriously, as well as staff support. You know, I mean, Korea can be a challenging place to acclimate to, and the culture is very, very different from a Western culture. So we know that like we have to be there to support our teachers because they need to understand the culture, and they need some guidance in kind of understanding the work culture and what's expected, because it's a big transition, it's a big adjustment, and we understand that, and that's why we really focus on being there for people to help guide them through that. And that doesn't end the first week after you get here. That's an ongoing process of cultural adaptation that can take years. So we know we need to be there to help them through that process, and be there for them at any stage, not just the first week, but throughout their time in Korea. Good question, Addie, in terms of ethnicity requirements. No, there are no specific ethnicity requirements. It really comes down to your nationality. It really comes down to what passport you hold. That is the major requirement. But within that kind of nationality requirement of the 7 native English speaking countries, there are no specific ethnicity requirements. So what are some of the most challenging things that teachers often face? And this kind of builds on what I just mentioned, getting used to a new job. You know, it's a lot to learn, especially since the vast majority of our teachers haven't been teachers before. And that's not something to like be like, oh my God, I'm going to be the one person who hasn't taught before. No, if you haven't taught before, you're like the 95% of people who come through the program. And so our program is designed to fit that type of profile. So it's okay. But it's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of anxiety that goes with that. And we understand that, and we want to be there to support people through that. Adapting to living in a new place, understanding the local culture, particular work culture. As I mentioned before, that is a big adjustment. The Korean organizational culture is a lot different from, say, for example, the American organizational culture, and that's something that is part of the value of this experience in the first place, because you're going to be in a totally different environment. But it does take some adjusting. We understand that, and that's what we're here for. Patience is also important throughout this process, and I think patience is probably on the rise since COVID. You know, I feel like the world has gotten a little bit more patient from COVID. Maybe that's one of the only that I can think of plus side of things. There are unexpected things that happen in Korea, things that happen that aren't well communicated in advance, and Korean people kind of are very patient and kind of roll with it. I think a little bit more, roll with the unexpected a little bit better than, for example, Americans, which I'm part of, so I kind of understand that culture the most. So coming through and teaching in a program in Korea does teach you a lot about patience, and you do definitely exercise your patience muscle, because unexpected things happen throughout this process, and also when you're living and working in Korea. And so that's probably one of the biggest challenges people face is with patience. And culture shock. We know everyone experiences some form of culture shock. Sometimes it's minimal. Sometimes it's pretty significant. So we spend a lot of time talking about recognizing culture shock, understanding it, coming to terms with it, overcoming it. And that is something we really focus intently on throughout our program, because it is a natural part of every Teach Abroad program, and Korea is no exception. Randall had a question about time left on your passport. I would say probably at least, I would say no less than 2 years would be ideal, honestly. I would say if you have less than 2 years, you may want to consider renewing your passport. There is not a requirement to have a COVID vaccine before you go to Korea at this time. It would not disqualify you at this time from coming to Korea. However, they may require you to get a COVID vaccine once you're in Korea. We are still this is still an evolving situation, but there may be a requirement that all teachers in the future in Korea be vaccinated. We don't know that for a fact, but I can see that coming down the pipe, just because they can vaccinate all their teachers, and that will reduce risk to transmission within the school environment. Good question, Derek. So different work culture. I mean, God, I could talk to you for hours about the differences between the U.S. and the Korean work culture. But I would say that it's a much more hierarchical work culture in Korea. So than in America, or than in many Western countries, where the work culture is a little bit more flatter. In Korea, it's more hierarchical, and there's certain expectations of deference and obedience and respect that are paid from the employee or younger to the boss or older. And there are certain kind of norms and expectations of interactions between the boss and the employee and roles to be played between the two that are in some ways unfamiliar to a lot of, for example, Americans or Western culture. So that can take some adjusting to. So that's kind of what I'm speaking to, if that makes sense. So why not just go solo on your own? Why not just call up one of these hagwons and just try to go directly with them? It is an option. It is a cheaper option. But I want to speak to you very seriously about why not do that? Why is it a much better option to go through an organization like Premier TEFL and our ground partnership? Number one, we vet the schools very carefully, especially when dealing with hagwons, which are the majority of placements in Korea. There are a lot of good hagwons, but there are also some really bad ones. And when I say bad ones, I mean ones that are small mom and pop shops that go out of business, or there may be larger organizations, but they don't like to pay their teachers, or they put a very unreasonable burden on their teachers in terms of workload and stuff. And so there are some bad hagwons out there. There are a lot of good ones too. And we've been doing this for 10 years now, and we've brought well over 1,000 teachers to Korea. And we know what the good ones are, and we know what the bad ones are. And we won't work with hagwons that don't treat our teachers well, pay them on time, and respect the work-life balance. And we want them to treat teachers fairly. And sometimes in Korea, it doesn't work out like that. But that's why you would choose to go to an organization like ours and not just go directly through a hagwon. Also, I will say that we work with a lot of larger hagwons that are reputable, and we send them teachers every year by the dozens and even hundreds sometimes. So when you come through an organization like Premier TEFL, I would say that these hagwons would be much more inclined to treat our teachers the right way, because if they mistreat our teachers, we will never send them another teacher, and that will shut off a spigot that is flowing a lot of teachers in their direction. If you come as a one-off person to Korea and try to find a placement, there's no disincentive really for them to mistreat that teacher. But if there is a huge disincentive to mistreat one of our teachers, because we'll never send them another teacher, and a huge source of their recruiting will be completely shut off. So there's incentives and disincentives, and they have a very big incentive to treat our teachers well and to be fair and to treat them with the respect that they should deserve. And so that's something that comes with having a lot of leverage, which we do in Korea with schools. Obviously, we provide a lot of logistics support. We're on the ground in Korea. We have an office. We actually have a school there as well. We have lots of staff. So when you come, you're not alone in Korea with no one having your back. You have an organization behind you to have your back throughout the process. Also, we're going to be able to support you, not just in logistics, not just in HR and stuff with your school, but also on the teaching side of things too. We have instructors in country. We have a lot of experience with teaching in Korea. So we're going to be able to advise you on teaching. So if you're struggling on the teaching side, we're also going to be able to support you. And I know Premier TEFL also has their own support for their alumni in the teaching area as well. Duncan asked a good question. Do you find that there's a difference between public school versus private among teachers? Not really. You know, I think that private has its benefits because you don't have to wake up as early. And I know that if you look at the general public, there aren't that as many morning birds as there are night owls. Most people are not the type of people that want to wake up really early in the morning. So the Hagwon's later in the day schedule really attracts people to the Hagwon's. But some people really have their mind set on the public school system as well. So I would say it's probably like 50-50 that people come in but like I said, a lot of people come in wanting public schools end up teaching in Hagwon's because that's what's available. And since the public schools have very limited intakes, and I would say over time, those intake numbers have been declining, not precipitously, but steadily. And Hagwon positions have filled the gap that majority of people are actually teaching in, like a vast majority are actually teaching in Hagwon. So, but I wouldn't say there's a specific preference either way. It's just a matter of like coming in, the research you've done, and where you end up might not be where you initially expected to be coming into the program. So yeah, I think going with an organization like us allows you to be assured that you're going to be going with a good organization. And if anything comes up, if there's anything that ever happens, that we're going to have your back. Also, not just your back in terms of HR, but in terms of logistics, helping with the process, and also in terms of teaching. As I mentioned previously, just getting over to Korea, all the documents you need, it's a struggle to do something like that on your own. You can do it, but it is a real challenge. And with us, as I mentioned, we are going to make sure you're on track. We're going to check in with you. We're going to set deadlines with you. We're going to help you through that process. We're going to vet all your documents to make sure that they're good. We're going to help you through the interview process. So there's a lot of kind of consultation and interaction throughout the process to get you over. And I think that can give you peace of mind that like, okay, I've got all my I's dotted and T's crossed. I'm going to get over there. There's no way this is going to go off the rails. I've got a good organization to help guide me through that process. Michael, that's a good question, and I will defer that to the people at the salespeople at Premier TEFL, and they can go through that with you. But I'm sure they've got your question, and we'll address that directly with you. So this is, I've kind of already touched on this, but just to mention, you know, we have a very competitive package that we offer to our teachers, free flights, free accommodation, high pay compared to where else you're going to be in the world. Korea has I think Korea has probably one of the best teach abroad packages that I've seen, you know, pound for pound. And I think that that's, and I've had a lot of experience with teach abroad packages. So, and that 13-month salary really goes a long way, and that's automatic. And then and at the emotional side, obviously having a team in country that's going to help support you through the process. You're going to learn a lot about the culture, not just on your own, but through our program, because we really do emphasize that kind of cultural experience in Korea. We want you to walk away not just having taught and earned some money and saved and traveled in Asia, but that you really got close to the Korean culture and gained some insights into the culture. And because we believe in that process, how when you finish teaching abroad, you should be a completely different person. It should change your life in so many fundamental ways. And a big part of that is from your engagement with the local culture. And so we want to make sure that that is kind of foremost in your mind, and that you're taking those steps, and that you're having an enriching cultural experience, because that's truly what changes you. Not just the teaching, earning, living abroad, but the cultural engagement.